Vanderbilt University, and then she went to Stanford Law School. And while she was working in Oakland, a case against the Oakland PD, she met a young man who kept detailed account of notes about some of the police brutality and the oppression that he was facing with Oakland PD. And so as she got ready to come forward with her case against the Oakland PD, she found out that he was a drug felon, right? So when she found out he was a drug felon, she quickly had to throw out the case because she couldn't use it because he was a felon, right? And so he felt really upset about that, and he threw out the note. She said that he ripped up the note and walked out of there and said, "You really never find nobody else in my neighborhood, that is not a felon of some sort, right?" So when she thought about that, she said that she ostracized him just like the rest of the community was. We're doing that to our own people sometimes, right? So she had started doing more research and really got involved with civil rights and activism, and that's what compelled her to tell her story. And that's why she wrote the book, The New Jim Crow, as a way of enlightening the community and telling the people about this mass incarceration system. So in the book, it starts out how we went through this war on drugs era. And the war on drugs was started by Nixon. He was claiming that drugs was America's #1 enemy. But it's funny because at that time, only between 2 to 6% of people really thought that drugs was a really big problem, right? The war on drugs focused primarily on crack cocaine, which gave us the mandatory sentencing act of 100 to 1, meaning that for every 5 grams of crack cocaine is the same sentence as 500 grams of powder cocaine, which is a big difference. So that's what led to when we had this mass incarceration of African Americans, because crack cocaine was primarily in the African American neighborhoods. So it says here, Alexandra wrote in her book, when Reagan got to office, he really used the media to push that agenda. She said, Reagan mastered the excision of race from conservative public discourse. So by Reagan strategically using the agenda setting theory to push the agenda of this war on drugs, he was still being able to be politically correct as he divided the classes amongst each other. So for a while in the media, the agenda setting theory worked like a charm. I did a research paper last semester on the war on drugs, and I found a quote by a man named Sajid Saree. In the article, he states, media outlets perpetuate crime-related and other negative views of minorities, which turned into reinforced attitudes and contributed to the development of punitive policies that affect such groups. So for months, ads in the newspapers were going like this, about welfare fiends and just negative words, dehumanizing and decriminalizing African Americans, right? They'll show African Americans as like black drug dealers or black criminals, or just black people in general just trying to manipulate the system. And so people in the back of their minds thought that, well, this must be, a problem that he has. So in the book, she talks about how, this persuaded some of the lower class whites who have felt, and some people who were part of the Democratic Party who have felt betrayed by the civil rights movements just 10, 20 years prior to conform to this Republican agenda and fight this war on drugs. So today, our prison industry is now another form of social control. We always use that word social control a lot. We say it in our sentences a lot. So I decided to really go into Google to find out what it really means, because we say it all the time. So when I looked it up, it said that social control is the study of the mechanisms in the forms of patterns of pressure through which society maintains social order and cohesion. So I really thought about that. So I continued to read the book. And I came across the story in chapter 4 that she wrote about a man named Terrence Bostwick. And Terrence Bostwick was a young man who was riding a bus, a Greyhound bus from Miami to Atlanta. And on the bus ride, 2 officers got on the bus to randomly search for people who were transporting drugs. So out of all the people on the bus, they chose him. And unfortunately for him, he was guilty. He did have the drugs. So when the police did come in, he did say, okay, you can search me. They found the drugs, arrested, so on and so on. But the problem with the story is that things like this were happening all the time, right? They were randomly coming on buses and randomly searching people for drugs. So Alexandra wrote in the book that, she said, for example, in one case sweep of 100 buses resulted in only 7 arrests. So they were just picking people out of the blue. So I thought about that, and it told me that, this pressure that the police were putting on us really fits that exact description of social control, right? Forms of pressure to be a win. So Alexandra also wrote, she said, I came to see the mass incarceration system in the United States had in fact emerged as stunningly incomprehensive and well-disguised system of racialized social control that functions in a manner strikingly similar to Jim Crow. She talked about the money as well. We could go on holiday about the money that's being in the prison systems, but some things that I found was that taxpayers spend around $70 billion a year on corrections yearly. And prisons and jails spend annually $200 billion annually on public safety. I also did some more research to find out some more about the money, and I've seen on the CNNmoney.com, the U.S. Census conducted a survey to find out how much do people spend on education and how much do we spend on prisons. Mm-hmm. And so it says here on CNNmoney.com, the government did a survey that wanted to find out where the money's going, and K through 12 in prison. And so in California, I don't know if you can see it on these screens, but it says that we spend $10,000 per student in comparison to about $45,000 to keep a person inmate. Striking. And even after they serve their time, they're still being punished for their crimes. That's when the book really, really focuses on the Jim Crow era. They get disenfranchised, right? So they lose all of their basic democratic rights: voting, housing, hindered with employment, financial aid for college students. They lose all of that, right? It says defranchise, deprive someone's right to vote or deprive someone's right of privilege. Just basic privileges. Still 2016. Michelle Alexander wrote in the book, she said, no other country in the world disenfranchises people who are released from prison in a manner even remotely resembling the United States. So I think that we need to focus more on, our rehabilitation programs and our treatment programs, right? Because if it really was a war on drugs, why not go with a different solution, The old solution hasn't been working, and it's in our names, corrections and rehabilitation. So I wonder, why are people really not getting rehabilitated? We have so many repeat offenders. It's just a cycle that's been continuing for so long that we need to be aware of. Those are some of the points that she makes in the book. And it's possible it could be done, because she told a story about Portugal. And in Portugal, they had a huge drug problem. And she said in the book, Portugal, for example, responded to persistent problems of drug addiction and abuse by decriminalizing possessions of all drugs and treatment, and redirecting the money that would have been spent putting drug users in cages into treatment and prevention programs. She said 10 years later, Portugal reported that rates of drug abuse and addiction have plummeted, and drug-related crime was on the decline as well. So as I close out my presentation before we get into our panel, I want to share a story that we've seen on CBS 60 Minutes. And in the story, it takes place in a nice suburb outside of Ohio, right outside Columbus, Ohio, a small suburb, where the story says where the average income for the families is about $80,000 a year. So it's pretty good neighborhood, right? And in the story is about these the town having a big heroin problem. And so the story highlights these 3 young adults, all in the age of 20. But the problem was they were using heroin since high school. They started out with prescription drugs, Vicodins and things like that. It was fun. In the story, though, we'll see that what happened was that they were able to get rehabilitated and go to these treatment programs and be okay. They weren't labeled as felons, right? They weren't disenfranchised. They didn't lose some of their basic human privileges. So it kind of tells me, obviously, right, we can do some type of rehabilitation, you know? So I wanna show a clip, just a quick clip from that. And listen to what she says.